Working the night shift at a gas station means a lot of waiting. Hours of nothing, broken up by the occasional customer stopping to refuel or stretch their legs. Most of the time, you barely even remember the people who come and go, but some of them stay with you. That night, it was almost 2:30 in the morning when she arrived. An old dark car pulled into the lot. Not at the gas pumps, not in one of the designated parking spaces. It stopped at the far end of the lot near the highway, where the streetlights barely reached. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out. She didn't look lost. She didn't look scared. She didn't look like someone who had been on a long trip and just needed to stretch her legs. She simply stood there for a moment looking around, before walking toward the store. And before she even reached the door, the car that had brought her was already gone. The engine rumbled as the vehicle turned sharply back onto the road, disappearing into the dark. The woman didn't look back. She just entered the store and in a calm voice asked, "Can I use the phone?" Her request caught me off guard. Nobody asks to use the gas station phone anymore. Everyone has a cell phone. Everyone sends messages. But she just stood there looking at me, waiting for an answer, as if there was nothing strange about it. "Yeah, sure," I said, pointing to the landline on the counter. She walked up to it without hurry, picked up the receiver, and dialed a number. I tried not to pay attention, but as the seconds passed, something started to feel off. She was holding the phone to her ear, but she wasn't saying anything. No hello, no greeting, just standing there listening. Little by little, my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the display. The number she had dialed wasn't a full number, just 3 digits. I stared at the phone in confusion. She had only dialed 3 numbers, and they weren't emergency services. Not 911, not anything that made sense. Just 3 random digits. And still, she stood there, holding the receiver to her ear, saying nothing. The silence in the store was uncomfortable. No other customers were around. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional click of the beverage fridge turning on and off. "You good?" I asked, trying to sound normal. She took a second too long to react. Then slowly she lowered the receiver. "He's coming to get me." Her voice was quiet, emotionless, like she was just stating a fact. And then, without another word, she walked out of the store and back into the parking lot. She didn't sit down. She didn't pace around like someone anxiously waiting. She just stood at the edge of the gas station lot near the curb, waiting. The cold night wind made her hair shift slightly, but she remained still, staring out at the dark highway. And that's when I noticed something that truly unsettled me. She wasn't just standing there. Her fingers were intertwined at chest level, thumbs pressed against each other. It wasn't impatience. It wasn't to keep warm. She was praying. She wasn't moving. Her fingers remained interlocked, pressed together in a silent grip, like she was preparing for something. I tried to ignore it. Tried to go back behind the counter and focus on anything else. But the station was empty, and the silence made her presence feel even heavier. Every now and then, I glanced outside. She was still there. 5 minutes. 10. 15. No cars stopped. No calls came in. But she kept waiting. And then, after almost 20 minutes, something truly disturbed me. She wasn't looking at the highway. If someone were coming to pick her up, she'd be watching the road. But she wasn't. Her eyes were locked on something else. The store. Or more specifically, me. After almost half an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The night air was colder than before, but I ignored it and walked toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. For a brief moment before speaking, her eyes shifted away, not toward the road, not toward a phone, toward the inside of the store. My throat went dry. Out of reflex, I glanced back, trying to see what she had looked at. From where I was standing, all I could see were the shelves, the counter, the faint reflection of the lights on the glass. Nothing that explained that look. Then slowly, she turned back to me, and finally answered. "He's almost here." My stomach tightened. The way she said it, "He's almost here," didn't feel like a response to me. It sounded more like a warning. And then when she reached the edge of the asphalt, something happened. She stopped. Didn't turn around. Didn't check for cars. She just stood there, on the edge of the road, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The silence stretched for a few seconds, and then she raised her hand and waved, not to me, to someone or something out there on the empty highway. I froze, watching that slow, deliberate motion. And without hesitating, without looking back, without saying another word, she stepped onto the road and disappeared into the darkness. No cars passed, no one else appeared. But somehow, I knew she wasn't alone when she left. And I never found out who she was waving to. Working the night shift at a gas station has its own rhythm. Most of the time, the place is empty, with only the occasional trucker stopping to refuel or grab a quick snack. But every now and then, a customer shows up that makes you wonder what the hell they're doing out so late. That night, it was close to 3 in the morning when he arrived. A black sedan pulled up to pump number 2. A common car, one that blended into traffic easily. The kind of car you'd forget after seeing it once. A man stepped out. He was in his 40s, wearing a denim jacket. Nothing about him stood out. He walked into the store, tossed some bills onto the counter and said, "Fill it up on 2. I grabbed the money and started processing the payment. But something immediately made me uneasy. His wife had stayed in the car. That wasn't strange on its own. What was strange was the way she sat there, completely motionless. She didn't check her phone. She didn't glance around impatiently like someone waiting for their partner to hurry up. She just sat there, staring directly at me through the glass. I looked away quickly, trying to ignore the weird feeling creeping up my spine. But out of instinct, I glanced back. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. She was holding something in her lap. I couldn't tell what it was. Small, rectangular. A phone? A notebook? A piece of paper? Whatever it was, she was gripping it tightly. Her fingers pressed into it hard enough that her knuckles looked pale. Holding on to it like it was important. Like she was waiting for the right moment to do something with it. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the customer in front of me. But the way she just sat there staring, clutching that object, was making it impossible. She wasn't just looking at me. She was looking through me. Something was very wrong. I turned back to the man at the register and forced a casual tone. "Cold night, huh? Your wife doesn't want to come inside?" He frowned for a second as if he didn't understand the question. Then slowly, he turned his head toward the car. He looked through the glass directly at where his wife was sitting and just stood there, staring, for too long. A silence stretched between us, uncomfortable and heavy. Just when I was about to change the subject, regretting I'd even asked, he finally spoke. "Oh, yeah, she's fine." The way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. It felt forced, like he had taken an extra second to process the question, like he had to think about the right answer. He turned back to me, took his change, muttered a quick thanks, and started walking toward the door. But before he stepped outside, he stopped. He didn't turn all the way back to face me. Just stood there, his hand on the door handle, and said without looking at me, "She won't talk to you." Then he left. The deep hum of the car's engine cut through the silence of the station as the sedan pulled out of the lot, its tires skimming slightly against the asphalt. I stood there staring at the empty space where the car had just been. My mind was stuck on 2 images, the woman gripping that object, and the man turning his head too fast. The bad feeling in my stomach wasn't going away. I swallowed dryly and rushed to the security monitor. I rewound the footage to the exact moment she lifted the object in her lap. The grainy screen flickered as I watched the outside camera feed. The man walking into the store, the car sitting at pump 2. And then for the first time I saw her move. She lifted the object. I paused the video. Leaned in closer, trying to see. The writing was uneven, shaky, pressed into the paper with force. Just 2 words. Help me. A chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. She had left the car, and I hadn't seen her do it. My hands tightened into fists as I rewound the footage again, searching for the exact moment she got out. My eyes stayed locked on the screen as I traced back the last few seconds before the car had driven away. There it was. The car stopped. The man walking out of the store. Her sitting in the passenger seat. And then, in the span of a single frame, she was gone. My blood went cold. This wasn't a camera glitch. It wasn't a recording error. I just hadn't seen it happen. She had gotten out before I or the driver had noticed. I stepped away from the monitor, my mind racing. If she left the car, then that meant she was still here. I swallowed hard and slowly lifted my head, looking through the store window. And there she was, standing at the edge of the parking lot. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the road. She wasn't moving, wasn't panicking. She just stood there holding the piece of paper between her fingers, waiting. The knot in my stomach tightened. I didn't want to go outside. I should have just stayed behind the counter, pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I took a step toward the door, then another, and just before I could open it, she dropped the paper, turned, and ran toward the highway. I rushed outside, my heart hammering against my ribs. The paper was still there, crumpled on the pavement, shifting slightly in the cold breeze. I wanted to go after her, call out, ask what was going on. But when I reached the edge of the station and looked out toward the road, she was gone. No passing cars, no figures in the distance. Nothing but the empty highway and the faint hum of the neon sign above me. She had just disappeared. I hesitated before crouching down to pick up the paper. My hands were shaking slightly. The paper was dirty, creased, stained with small smudges. I unfolded it slowly, feeling my chest tighten before I even read it. There were 5 words written in thick, heavy strokes. He is not my husband. Working the night shift at a gas station has its perks. There's little movement, mostly silence, and if you learn to ignore the drunks and grumpy truckers, it can even be peaceful. I had been there for a year, and despite some weird nights, nothing had ever really made me question my safety. At least not until that night. It was around 1 a.m. when the car pulled up to pump number 3. A silver sedan, old but well-maintained. The kind of car you'd expect an older man to drive. But no one got out. At first I thought they were just taking their time, maybe counting their money or waiting for someone to return from the store. Then I noticed something strange. The engine was off, but the headlights were still on, and so were the interior lights. I kept watching, waiting for someone to get out, but nothing happened. The windows were dark and I couldn't see anything inside. So, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the store. As I got closer, a strange chill ran through my stomach. The driver's seat was empty. No one in the passenger seat either. The car looked abandoned. I took a step back, confused. Maybe the driver had already gone inside without me noticing. I walked around the station, but it was completely empty except for me. And then, while I stood there trying to make sense of it, I heard the click of the car's automatic locks. The doors had locked themselves. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe the car had an automatic locking system. Some newer models do that, but this sedan looked at least 15, 20 years old. I wasn't convinced. I tried looking through the windows, but they were too dark, only reflecting the weak glow of the station lights. So, without thinking too much, I went inside to check the security cameras. The screen showed pump number 3, the silver sedan sitting there. Nothing unusual, but as I kept watching, something started to bother me. The car had been there for over 10 minutes and no one had ever stepped out. I rewound the footage, went back to the exact moment it pulled in. It drove in slowly, stopped at pump 3, and just sat there. No door ever opened. No one ever got out. The car was just there. A bad feeling started growing in my chest. I looked out the window. The car was still there, exactly as it was in the footage. Same position, same angle. Except now, the headlights were off. I was sure they had been on before. The cold night air hit my face as I walked toward pump 3, my steps feeling heavier with each one. As I stopped next to the car, something immediately unsettled me. The smell. A faint, metallic scent in the air. Not strong, but distinct. Something like rust. Or blood. I stood beside the car, feeling the metallic smell mix with the night air. Now that I was closer, I noticed another unsettling detail. The body of the car was clean, well maintained, but the driver's door handle wasn't. It was scratched, slightly worn, as if someone had dragged a key or something sharp over it. My hand hovered over the handle. I didn't want to touch it. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, go inside, lock the door, and forget this car existed. But something in me, maybe that stupid curiosity everyone has in situations like this, made me act. I leaned in slightly, trying to peek through the small crack in the window. The darkness inside felt thicker than it should be. My eyes took a moment to adjust, searching for any detail. A seat, a reflection, a silhouette. Then I saw it. It wasn't a face. It wasn't eyes. It was just a shape. A presence sitting in the driver's seat. Still, unmoving. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed something that made my heart pound. The rearview mirror was turned toward me. My chest rose and fell in short breaths. The car's mirror was turned toward me. Not to the back seat, not to the road. To me. Like someone had adjusted it to watch me. I instinctively stepped back, my skin crawling. I didn't want to look inside anymore. I didn't want to confirm whether that dark shape in the driver's seat was moving, breathing, or just waiting. I took another step back and heard a soft click. The doors unlocked. My body went cold. The car was inviting me in. The dry sound of the lock echoed in the silent station. My hands trembled. But the thing that unsettled me the most wasn't the car locking or unlocking by itself. It was the fact that at no point had I ever heard the doors open. I needed to leave. I needed to go now. I turned toward the register, ready to grab my things when the radio on my belt suddenly crackled. "Don't turn your back." Davy's voice. But something was wrong with it. Very wrong. It was lower, hoarse, like it had been filtered through glass. Like it wasn't normal. My body locked up. My instincts screamed, "Don't turn around. Don't look back." And then just behind me, on the store's glass door, a new sound. A wet, dragging noise, like a hand slowly sliding down the glass. The air felt heavier. Every second stretched, as if time had slowed around me. The marks on the door were moving. Before, they had been still, pressed against the glass. Now the fingers were spreading apart, stretching downward, like something was slowly trying to get inside. My chest rose and fell too fast. Run. Get out. Now. With shaking hands, I grabbed my radio and pressed the button. "Davy?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Static. Then a response. "I'm outside." The exact same words, the exact same tone. My stomach turned. I spun toward the door, unable to stop myself. The glass was clean. The handprints were gone. And outside, at pump 3, the silver car was no longer there.